Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of the DMZ America podcast for April 17th, Wednesday. It's 2024. I'm Scott Stantis, editorial cartoonist, coming to you from the right distance from my pal Ted.
Very distant, but not emotionally or sexually. It is, well, sexually, yes. And I'm editorial
Jesus.
cartoonist Ted Rall, coming to you from the left. I would say hello, everybody, but there's certain people that I don't want to say hello to. So hello to almost everybody.
Wow. Well, we'll have to learn who those other people are in just a
Looking at
moment.
you, Austin Butner. Anyway, all right, bye.
Well, I got to tell you, last week, if you listened to and or watched the podcast, which my wife did and said we sounded great, which is, high praise.
Well, good.
Um, we were actually in the same room. We're in Ted's studio in his palatial New York apartment. And what the hell? Where was I going with this? Where was I going with this, Ted?
Something about the love of Clovis or
The love of campaign buttons. Listen, I am suffering. Ted came down with what we thought was allergies, maybe a flu. Now I have the allergies, which makes me think it's the flu. So if there's, all of this gets a little
and
muddy.
there is a flu
Anyway,
going around to make it all confusing. Yeah.
yes. So what I was going to get at is when we went out to a couple of bars, we talked about the pro-Palestinian protests and the what's going on in Gaza. And Ted and I, as you may know, disagree on this issue a lot and fairly passionately. Ted maybe more passionately than I do, but that's just Ted
Well, I mean,
being Ted.
I get irritable when it's like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians being murdered just for fun in a disgusting land grab. So yeah,
Well, I'm not
it
sure it's
gets
for
me grouchy.
fun. But so anyway, so we're going to a couple of issues that we're going to tackle, but and the one that it's the valedictorian for USC, a Muslim American, they canceled her speech, which I mean I have a serious issue with, and I know Ted does probably for very different reasons. But connect that with the pro-Palestinian protests sweeping across the American campuses, and Ted just mentioned before we started recording what's going on at Columbia, and maybe you want to fill in our listeners real
Yeah,
quickly
right
about
near.
that.
So Columbia University became the fourth of the Ivy League colleges after MIT, UPenn, and Harvard. I don't know actually if MIT is technically in the Ivy League, but I mean they might as well be. But anyway, these highly elite schools. That is the president is up there on Capitol Hill testifying about alleged anti-Semitism on college campuses, specifically her own. And at the same time, tensions are very, very high back on campus. Currently, even as we speak, the pro-Palestinian students have decided to occupy the central lawn of the campus, which is sort of a very contained campus, not far from where I live on the in Manhattan. That's up on the upper west side, called Morningside Heights. There's talk about like maybe a repeat of the Columbia 1968 student uprising, when students took over the entire campus or most of it before the police came in and they called it the bust. But anyway, that's pretty out there. And of course, also there were those major protests. I guess that happened Monday, when there were simultaneous, unannounced protests that shut down the Golden Gate Bridge connecting San Francisco to Marin County in the San Francisco Bay Area, the Brooklyn Bridge here in New York City, the approach road to O'Hare Airport in Chicago, and four other major cities all had simultaneous protests that were also aimed at shutting down infrastructure. So all that's going on.
Well, let me ask you right out of the bat, Ted. Do the students at Columbia have the moxie to occupy today?
Well,
And I'm being
that's
serious.
a good fucking question. So, and I have some a little bit of insight that's very out of date, but more recent than 1968. So, in the mid 80s, Columbia University was the target of students like me who protested their policy vis-a-vis what was then apartheid era South Africa, and called for divestiture of the very large multi-billion-dollar portfolio of Colombia out of South African stocks. There were protest demonstrations planned. I was part of this. I was on the steering committee to discuss the possible occupation of Hamilton Hall, which is the main administrative building for Columbia College. And long story short, they decided that I was outvoted. I wanted to rock it old school, and we were going to like lock ourselves inside and like not let the cops come in and get us, and do anything necessary to resist until we got all arrested. That was like that was a little too rough for my colleague, for my fellow students. They were like, no, we'll lock ourselves outside. So what that looked like is they camped outside. It should be pointed out, it was January, and this is pre-climate change. So it was freezing fucking cold. And I mean, it was like 10 degrees out. I mean, that would never happen now. Now it'd be 70. But like, the point is that like, you know, so it was like, it was a problem. And I was like, so they locked the doors to the building, which allowed administrators to come and go using steam tunnels underneath the campus that connect to other buildings. So the building essentially was in business, but the front doors were locked. It was still, as I pointed out, illegal because it violated the fire code. So there was cause to be arrested, except that you're arrested and, you know, cold. I was like, we could be arrested and, you know, warm. And then finally there was this, what finally caused me to break this all down, and I went my separate ways from them, was when they said, okay, we're going to cooperate with the NYPD and fill out forms so that we can be quickly arrested and processed in and out of the 26th precinct without having to, you know, spend more than an hour and a half in the booking process. We won't have to spend the night in the lockup, but down at the Tombs or anything like that. And I was like, Steve Biko didn't get processed easily by the South African police. Nelson Mandela didn't, you know, he had some inconveniences. And I was like, you guys are frankly a bunch of cowards, and I can't be part of this. And so I doubt that today's students are braver than we were. I could be wrong, but there has been no sign so far in any of these demonstrations that show that the modern left, including the pro-Palestine liberation movement, is more willing to engage, you know, mix it up with the police or with anyone else if need be. And, you know, look, good for them. They can stay nonviolent, whatever. But the point is, violence isn't always useful. But, you know, it's like, occupying does require the willingness to confront, to possibly become the victim of violence. And I don't know if they're that brave.
Well, I think even beyond that, and you and I have talked about this on the podcast before, so we're not really going on new territory, but just the fact that the protests, remember the women's movement was going to women's marches. We're going to march every month against Donald Trump for his entire administration. That happened once.
No, that's
once, and one and a half.
It happened 1.5 times. That's right.
Okay. So that didn't go forward. The Million Mile March against gun violence, for gun control laws happened once.
It didn't have a million moms.
I think it was a pretty big turnout, but it was
don't ever call yourself a million unless you have at least a million. You know what I mean?
Is that the Ted Rall?
Be like lots of moms, many moms. Some
mucho moms.
The moms that were the moms who showed up.
But the protests, that all these protests are supposed to go on. Now, frankly, the pro-Palestinian stuff has been happening with more regularity than I expected, quite frankly. It's lasted more than
twice a week, I would say, on average.
Right.
So substantial. This is a sustained protest movement, something that you don't see very often.
Right. Well, we haven't seen at all. And now
we did. We saw Black Lives Matter after the killing.
This is true. You're right. Floyd. You're right. And that was more and more consistent, and that led to nothing happening.
Correct. That's right.
Which shocks me because I think their point was well taken, that
killing
changing.
like strangling unarmed people for bullshit reasons is not good.
That's
Yeah.
that's a bad thing. Shooting someone like they did at Laquan McDonald in Chicago, show up at a scene for less than 6 seconds and start opening fire. Stuff like that is bad. I think many of us can say this is bad.
Tacky, gauche.
Gauche to the extreme. But in all seriousness, reimagining policing in America, which had become so militarized and so confrontational that clearly something has to be done and nothing's been done. I mean, they've talked about it. Chicago's one area that they've
Minneapolis
talked
talked about completely defunding their cops.
Right,
It
that's
lasted
stupid.
a hot second, and then poof.
Well, it's also a dumb idea, because, well, for obvious reasons. But so, okay, let's segue with this to the USC, University of Southern California, valedictorian, Muslim American woman. She was going to give a speech. They canceled the speech for reasons that they will not say why, other than security reasons. They're getting some crazy ass dipshits from around the country saying, I'm for the UP of Michigan and I don't like this. Which you get from everything now. So you can't really respond to it in a serious way. But this is the woman whose name I don't have in front of me, but she has said that she doubts that these were the kinds of threats that should have precluded her speech. And frankly, they should have given her the option.
Asna Tabassum.
And she should have been given the option. They should say, listen, we're getting, here's full disclosure. And they haven't even disclosed to her what the threats were, the nature of them, or how seriously they were, which I find disgusting. You and I agree on transparency. If you're going to tell me you can't do something because there's a security threat, you better damn well tell Ted Rall or Scott Stantis what the threat is. First and foremost, if it's serious, we have family. We don't want them hurt. And, almost equally as important, we don't want us hurt. So you have to tell her what the threats were. They did not tell her what the threats were.
That's because there were none.
I think, no, there's always threats. Ted,
No,
you and I are in a profession.
I'm sorry, there is literally no threat that could possibly, I don't care if you had a credible threat that the state of Israel was going to send a nuclear weapon to blow up Los Angeles to stop her speech. That's not a reason to cancel the speech. There can be no reason to cancel that speech. There is no acceptable reason. There is no I don't care if they say,
Really?
that there's gunmen coming, then you hire security for that. I mean, you're going to need it anyway, right?
You're right, exactly.
Whether the speech takes place or not. So, I mean, the point is, you just can't live that way. The only way to read this is that USC took a Zionist, pro-Israel, anti-Palestinian position on the Middle Eastern conflict, and they can say, and I don't know what happened in that room, and that may never have happened at all, or crossed the lips, or even the synapses of any of the people in the decision-making loop here. That doesn't matter. You made that decision effectively. That's the decision you've made. It is completely unacceptable for a zillion reasons, not the least of which is she's the valedictorian. She gets a ticket as the person who did the best work and studying out of her class at a very big school. She has the right to give a fucking speech. And I don't care if she goes out there and says, kill all the Jews, blow up the state of Israel. This is America. You can say that. Everyone else can say, if she says something wrong or bad, that she's wrong or bad. But the point is that she has the right to give a speech. She should give that speech. No one should censor her speech. What they did is absolutely repugnant, disgusting, indefensible, and they should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. I hope she sues them, and I think she will prevail, because this is, I think it's state censorship. I mean, I know USC is a private institution, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if this kind of directive came from the US government, from like the Department of Homeland Security or something like that.
I'm going to be more cynical than that, Ted. Which is out cynicking Ted Rall is tough. but I think it came from, you touched on it for a second, a moment ago, and that is that a large base for their fundraising,
Mm.
which you and I talked about. I mean, by the way, folks, this tone and tenor of Ted talking like this is what we had in bars in New York last week.
Oh yeah.
But the largest, I'm not sure if they're the largest, but they have to rank certainly near the top 10 contributions to USC is from the Jewish community in Southern California. In fact, Ted and I talked about this over drinks again when Spielberg and George Lucas gave a substantial contribution to colleges. Both of those guys were not accepted into USC. They went to Long Beach State, where I went for a short period of time, and they did not give the money to Long Beach State. They gave it to USC because that's where you're supposed to give a lot of money. They have a large endowment, as very much like Columbia, very much like Harvard, very much like Yale, billions of dollars. They don't need the money, but somewhere along the line, a contributor or a handful of contributors, very powerful, wealthy contributors who support Israel, came to them and said, you got no, just no. And you can't allow that to happen. Listen, I'm pro-Israel and Ted is pro-Palestinian, although I think there's a middle ground that we can both meet on this one. And I believe that we can and have. But regardless of that, I am a First Amendment guy, and I lived in the friggin' United States of America where we have a goddamn First Amendment. And you don't get threatened. And if you do get threatened, you say, fuck you, and you give the speech anyway. But that's not what happened here.
And also, and that's really the point, Scott. What I'm about to say is just a side issue, a side note. But side notes are sometimes worth hearing. Andrew Guzman, he's the provost at USC, he said that this was in order to prevent substantial security risks. He said, and then he was asked by reporters, local reporters there at WABC TV out there in Los Angeles, which by the way, I appreciate a great deal because they did really strong reporting on the Los Angeles Times issue with me at the time. Anyway, WABC asked if there had been any actual threats, and he said, no, there's been no threats.
He said no?
No, he said no. We can't ignore the fact that similar risks have led to harassment and even violence at other campuses, is all he had to say. The intensity of feelings fueled by both social media and the ongoing conflict have grown to include many voices outside of USC and has escalated to the point.
What does that even mean?
In other words, it's like literally saying, we're going to puss out. There's been no threats whatsoever. We're just going to puss out, maybe because of our alums, or maybe because of like groups on campus that are pro-Israeli, like Trojans for Israel, which is, I'm going to just say, is an unfortunate name. Because like in fact, Trojans is an unfortunate name.
It is.
Yes. But anyway, because I have a certain visual there. But
yes.
Anyway, it says the spokesperson for Trojans for Israel, I'm going to say that many times, Vice President Ella Echo said, because it says that the lady who's the valedictorian, in her bio, she states that she calls for the abolition of the state of Israel, which is completely anti-Semitic, and that makes us Jewish students at USC feel unsafe, unheard, and targeted. Ella, I'm going to speak slowly and use small words. You don't have any right to feel safe from words. No one has a right to feel safe from words because this is America. Also, you are heard because you're able to be interviewed by WABC TV, but also it's not your time to be heard. If you wanted to be heard, you should have been valedictorian. It's her turn to be heard. And in terms of targeted, that's bullshit. And also calling for the abolition of the state of Israel is not anti-Semitic. So,
well, you and I disagree on that, but that's another podcast. That's absurd. That is absurd on the face of it.
Abolition of Vatican City as a separate nation state, that does not make me anti-Catholic. It doesn't
make you pro-Catholic.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't speak to how I feel about Catholics at all.
I think it does, and we need beers in front of us to have that conversation. But that's I agree with you in your assessment of what this is, Ted, because this is this is just wrong.
This made me sick
And
when I saw it. I
yeah,
mean, this young, powerful, beautiful, smart woman who is like, her parents are going to come and see
yeah,
her,
yeah.
and she has,
Immigrant parents, by the way.
and they're
I mean,
taking, and USC is taking a huge shit on her, on the Palestinian community, on Muslims in general. If you talk about unheard, and like, I don't want to
oh
keep,
yeah,
like, talk about,
yes, I would have
she's
to
been
agree.
censored. This is bullshit.
I would agree completely. Let's segue down to then another Israel issue, the Israel-Iran conflict. I'm not sure what the hell to call it. Israel bombs and kills Iranians in the Iranian consulate in
Including a top
Syria,
general.
including the top general. Iran then says we're going to reciprocate. They launched a fuck ton of missiles and drones, all of which were shot down by Israel, United States, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia,
France,
and with no damage.
and the UK.
France and the UK. So no damage caused to Israel.
Well,
Now
that's not
Israel,
quite true. There was a young girl, I believe she was 7 years old, a Bedouin girl who suffered pretty serious injuries from,
okay.
I guess, I don't know if it was a missile or a drone missile.
So one of the missiles got through there, but for the most part, it was a non-event. And now Israel is saying we're still considering what our response will be. And it's just going, okay, that's escalation. You had your say, you killed Iranians. They had their say, they injured an Israeli. Now stop it. Just knock that shit off. I mean, you've already got one war.
Biden and other Americans advised. The president asked Bibi Netanyahu to take the win. You won. You repelled this attack. Of course, it was meant to be repelled. That's why it was announced days in advance.
Yeah, let me ask you. I mean, because you have been to that region many times, and I defer to your wisdom, and because you've talked to people in those areas,
and I've been to Iran,
and you've been to Iran and partied with Iranians.
I have actually. I got to tell you, those are wild parties. No kidding.
I've heard the details, and our listeners don't need to.
No, they do not.
But what I still can't get my head around what Iran hoped to achieve. Did they know that all their missiles and drones would be shot down?
They hoped that they would all be shot down.
So what's the point? Because here's the thing. Israel has Iranian blood on their hands from the attack in Syria. That means, so they purposefully, consciously went
against the sovereign soil of Iran, because they blew up a consulate. A consulate is Iranian soil.
So Iran responds this way, which seemed to me, I don't know how else to put this, Ted, a really wussy, weird way. We talked about it when it happened, because I just left New York, and then the attack from Iran happened. And my question to you then was, what's going on? You felt this was fodder for the Arab street. I'm not sure this nourishes that in any way.
Well, not much, but I think look, here's what I think happened. First of all, the Iranians are extremely careful people, and that includes the rulers of the Islamic Republic. They've been beleaguered for a long time. They've been suffering from US trade sanctions. Don't forget the pressure that they've been under geopolitically, being squeezed on both major borders with Afghanistan and Iraq by US occupations that lasted for decades. So, imagine if like, say, China occupied Canada and Mexico at the same time. We'd be like, oh, we'd be feeling the squeeze, right? So the Iranians have been, they're very measured and very tempered people. And so they decided, look, we can't let this pass. We've let too many things pass. We let the murder of Soleimani by Trump in Iraq go. We're not going to let this, like, we can't let this go, or the Iranian people are going to think we're pusses. So, but we also don't want to escalate this and turn it into World War III. We don't want a hot war with the Israelis. So how do we get them to fuck off and leave us alone? And so they came up with this solution. It's a show of strength. It's like they sent over 300 drones and cruise missiles over, but they warned about it. And so what's the implication? Well, with plenty of warning, days of warning of when and how it was going to take place, of course they could almost all be shot down. But next time, there might not be a warning. Next time, the Iranian Air Force might directly fly over Jordan and Iraq over to Israel and bomb Israel itself directly. They have a real Air Force. It's like, so it's it's basically like saying, look, stop fucking with us. This is a shot across their bow. It's like we're going to make a big show of strength, but they're all duds effectively.
Well, in fact, the Iranians over last night. Okay, and I question, why do a performative act when the other side has already stabbed you effectively?
Because they don't want to escalate.
Okay, but last night and this morning they said they had, obviously news conferences and stuff saying, Israel, if you respond to this, then you ain't seen nothing. Then you're just going to get it again.
Well, that's right. And I don't know what that means. I mean, obviously, one of the big problems in any kind of military conflict, where they say it's diplomacy by other means, right? But it isn't really, because what happens is when communications break down to the point where you're firing projectiles at each other, like we see in Russia and Ukraine, it means that you don't understand each other even well enough to disagree, like the way you and I do, where we can talk. I mean, I think if you and I talk about almost anything, like I think I have a pretty good sense, for example, of, why you support Israel. And like, I could make that argument. Well, why does Scott feel the way he does? I can explain that. I can get into your head. I think you have a pretty good sense. You could do the same thing with me.
Yeah, I think
we
so.
both know where we're coming from. If you can't get there through communications, that's where things break down and you go into fuck you mode. Well, the problem is the Israelis and the Iranians do not get each other at all. And like and I think there's probably Iranians within the intelligence community who do understand Israel and vice versa. But overall, the leadership doesn't get each other. And the Israelis miscalculated. They thought, it's sort of like if you think of Pearl Harbor, why did the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor? They didn't think we were going to declare war. They thought it was a warning. They thought because Hawaii wasn't a state, that we viewed it as a far-flung colony, that we really wouldn't care. We'd be like, oh shit, okay, we'll leave them alone. It was a cultural misunderstanding. I think this is the same sort of thing. The Israelis had kind of gotten used to, we can hit the Iranians whenever we want and nothing will happen. The Iranians are like, okay, well, we want to disabuse you of that, of that assumption. So now when the Iranians come back and say, okay, next time we're really going to mean it, the question is, how do you interpret that? I interpret that as next time there will be an Iranian Air Force direct attack against Israel. But I could be wrong. They could mean something completely different.
No, I think if Israel attacks Iran again in the way that it attacked it in Syria, no question in my mind, Iran then will do what Iran has to do, and that is then it becomes a hot war. Then it becomes,
because the Israelis have been extremely provocative with the Iranians, and the Iranians they've played like the Israelis have been like the small yippy dog at the dog run who's biting the leg of the Great Dane, who's looking down like, what are you doing? But sometimes the Great Dane gets grouchy and he has to bite back. That's what's happening.
Okay, we're going to say that with support of Hamas, of Hezbollah, its attacks.
Well, that's the Israeli argument. The Israeli argument is like,
well, I think it's reasonable.
You Iranians are too cute by half. You think you can like wage war against us all the time through your proxies, and that you guys are insulated from any kind of payback. Fuck you. We're coming for you. That's their point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't disagree with it.
So and it's not. They're both not wrong.
And on that note, that they're both not wrong.
And by the way, I do want to just quickly say to my lefty friends in the Palestinian liberation movement, stop blocking bridges, stop blocking airports. You're losing hearts and minds. I mean, I was thinking about like they blocked the Golden Gate Bridge for 5 fucking hours. Okay, so there's old dudes who are like 60 years old and draw cartoons, and they can't hold their piss for 5 fucking hours. Okay, like I'm not even kidding. Or like, what about kids? People had babies like in their car, and their baby can't sit in the car for 5 fucking hours, might not have enough food, might
Yeah, but
not have enough diapers.
doesn't this fall into the Ted Rall, if protests are bullshit unless they cause discomfort at the very least?
Yes, and they should absolutely cause discomfort, but not to people who are blameless. This is like San Francisco, like they have this thing called critical mass where the bicyclists go at rush hour and block rush hour traffic. Trust me, having been in I'm a bicyclist. Trust me, having been in a car when that happened, all I thought was, these people are assholes. It's like, go and inconvenience the powers that be. Go and block the street outside of the Israeli consulate. Make it so that they can't come and go. Don't block and don't like literally harm innocent civilians, which is what you're doing here. Like, I mean, come on, people going to O'Hare who had to get out of the and lug their luggage like 2.5 miles to go and try to catch their flight. And if they don't catch it, then they get canceled. They have to pay $200 in rescheduling fees. They miss important appointments. There are people probably going to see a dying relative. Cut the shit. You're being assholes. This is not the way resistance works. Resistance is targeted against the powers that be, not against innocent civilians.
Well, and speaking of 60-year-olds who have to pee, I'm going to cut this short now, or end this segment right now.
Okay.
You're listening to the DMZ America podcast. I'm Scott Stantis, editorial cartoonist, coming to you from the right.
And I'm Ted Rall, editorial cartoonist, coming to you from the left.
And we'll be back with more right after this. And as promised, we're back. I'm Scott Stantis, editorial cartoonist, coming to you from the right.
And I'm Ted Rall, editorial cartoonist, coming to you from the left.
So Trump on trial. Apparently, the former president fell asleep during the proceedings. You've been through court proceedings, Ted. I don't suspect
at all.
No, I hear they're horribly drudgery. I've never really experienced it. So anyway, so so now he's being tried for giving money to a porn star to shut her up. I don't know that that's a crime. I certainly don't think it's a crime that's going to send anybody to jail. Maybe I'm wrong. Ted, I mean, this is the Republicans and many of Trumpy and MAGA world are saying this is just the big, lawfare, which I think is kind of a clever name for it. Mm-hmm. Is that what this is?
Yeah. It's a very bad look for Democrats. I mean, you have a DA, Alvin Bragg, here in Manhattan, who decided to launch the first ever criminal prosecution of a former president of the United States on the flimsiest, most trivial possible charge, using a legal argument that is dubious as hell. I mean, the thing is, Scott, you have to go through a lot of logical leaps to get there, right? So Trump paid $130,000 to Stormy to get her to shut the fuck up. He gave the money so what happened was Michael Cohen, his attorney, forwarded the money, then said, "Hey, Don, pay me back the 130. Don said, "Sure, but I don't want anyone to know this was hush money." Said, "Can we make it look like you just billed me and issue me a fake invoice for legal fees?" He's like, "Yeah, sure, whatever. So we'll make that legal expenses." So there's no allegation that Donald Trump dipped into his campaign funds in order to do this. It's his own personal money, no question about that. Then ironically, he could legally use campaign funds to spend on legal expenses, as him and Biden are now doing in this cycle. But he didn't do that. So Alvin Bragg, who ran when he ran for office, promised to get Donald Trump. He came up with this very arcane thing. So basically, under campaign finance law, the argument is that effectively this payoff was a campaign expense because it took place shortly before the 2016 election. And it was meant in part, not just to keep her quiet and telling Melania and everyone else and just embarrassing him, but also to improve his chances of winning the White House. This is some pretty weak tea to begin with. And it's so weak that when John Edwards, who did the same exact thing, was tried for it in 2012 by the federal government, the case fell apart. The jury rejected one case, and all the other counts they were hung on. He wasn't convicted of anything. The DOJ, in fact, considered this case against Trump, and they said, "Look at what happened with Edwards. this isn't winnable. This is like bullshit. It's like, it's not a felony, right?
So let me stop you right there and
So-
just inquire, because I'm a little lost. What is he being charged with exactly?
So, violation of federal campaign law.
But none of the money came from the campaign.
No, it did not. Literally, it's just like basically like misreporting, like fucking around with like your reports, basically like rejiggering some shit that kind of doesn't really matter. That's really true what happened. And so then Alvin Bragg comes in. He's a local prosecutor. Bear in mind, the campaign finance law is a federal law. And so his complicated scheme says that in New York, if you do commit a wire transaction with the intention of committing a crime, that rises from a misdemeanor to a felony. And not only that, you can as soon as you discover it is when the clock starts to tick, not when the crime occurred. So even though normally the statute of limitations would have like killed this years ago, it's like we can revive it because we just literally figured out how to charge it. That's literally the argument. I mean, I don't think this New York jury is going to convict. I don't think they're going to convict Trump. I don't know if it'll be a hung jury or if it'll be a 12 Angry Men scenario, or they just throw the whole thing out unanimously. More likely that. I don't think this is going to work. I think there's too many giant leaps that you're asking a jury to do. And it's not even a factor of like whether you like Donald Trump or not, or whether you think the thing is, it's just like there's kind of like no crime.
Right. And I think too, here's what
it's a technicality. It's a ticket. It's like
right.
someone in prison for 20 years for like double parking.
Having been involved in politics, this sort of shit happens all the time, especially post-mortem, because campaigns are hectic, crazy things. And so paperwork gets thrown around everywhere. And oh shit, I forgot to file this paper. I forgot to file these reports. And they get, if it does get to rise to the level of criminality, which it almost never does, it's almost always handled with a fine and everyone goes their separate ways. But what bothers me, Ted, and what you talked about here is that Alvin Bragg ran on a platform. It's a elective office. Am I correct in this? Assuming
Correct.
that? Mm-hmm. And he ran on a platform of prosecuting Trump.
Like Letitia James.
Fani Willis.
In Georgia.
They all ran on platforms that they were going to prosecute a human being. Now, listen, I'm no fan of Donald Trump's. Ted is no fan of Donald Trump's. No. Believe me, we both find him repulsive and repugnant. But here's the thing, folks, and this is why this sort of thing should matter to you, is it can happen to you.
Yes.
All of a sudden, the Justice Department can turn on a dime and say, and the prosecutors can run and say, I'm going to prosecute Ted Rall. Yep. And I want you to vote for me because I'm going to do that. And that's so contrary.
So dangerous.
So contrary to the idea of American jurisprudence and justice.
Here's the thing. I mean, if look at Donald Trump, I mean, whether or not he's guilty of a crime, I know not, right? But what is true is that, like, imagine you're him. And you hear that a DA candidate running to say, I'm going to prosecute him. And you're like, what? Really? That's like and then he's voted in, and then he does that. I mean, you can't blame Donald Trump, or like, let's just call him John Smith. You can't blame John Smith for saying they're out to get me. I mean, they are out to get him. I mean,
just because
if you're not out to, if that's not out to get you, that phrase doesn't mean anything.
Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. And this is one of those.
You don't even have to be paranoid here. They said they were out to get you.
Yeah, they ran on a platform of, so that is so deeply disturbing. I think we just wanted to use this.
It should be illegal.
It should be. And here's the other thing is, I mean, just the case itself, if it's true that no campaign funds were used, then that's bullshit right there. But the other thing is, if Ted, I said I spent a week with Ted last week and a few days at his apartment, and I want him to shut up about what happened there.
Shut up about what?
There you go. Thank you. That $10 was well spent.
What $10?
My point is that is that in and of itself a crime? And it just isn't. And this doesn't rise to that level.
You know what this
And
is like? It's very much like what happened to former New York Governor Eliot Spitzer. New York, he hired a prostitute, didn't want anyone to find out. So he didn't get charged with, hiring a prostitute, which is illegal. What happened is he got charged with wire fraud, I believe it was, because he sent the money through a fake bank account to the hooker or the hooker's agency. I mean, come on, really? I mean, it's like, if there's a crime here, it's the fact that he was like, doing it with a hooker while he was married. I mean, that's not even really a crime. The hooker part's a crime, but it's a minor crime. So they basically decide to bootstrap this, the attempt to cover up your minor crime with another minor crime. Come on.
And how did that trial turn out?
Oh, that's a good. I actually don't think he was ever. I think they decided to drop the charges, but he was forced to resign as governor of New York, which is really too bad because he was an excellent governor.
Well, on that note, we will shut down this particular segment of the DMZ America podcast. When we come back, other stuff.
Okay. Other stuff. Stay tuned.
And welcome back to the third and final segment of the DMZ America podcast. I'm Scott Stantis, coming to you from the right.
And I'm Ted Rall, coming to you from the left.
So the economy seems to be a growing campaign issue. The Biden White House keeps telling us that inflation's not so bad, but when you go out for dinner or a cup of coffee, that puts a lie to that idea. And now the Biden administration, because they're tough on somebody, have decided to be tough on China. And they're tripling the tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum. And it's just, if you're going to fight inflation, tripling, the price of a commodity that many people use and many industries use may not be the best approach. Ted, tariffs always piss me off anyway. You as a student of 19th century presidential politics know tariffs were a huge issue. We didn't have income taxes.
That's right.
That's how the United States government made money. We put tariffs on this and that. Various candidates ran, Republicans, Democrats ran it saying, well, I'm going to cut tariffs. I'm going to raise tariffs, one way or the other. This does, and in fact, the tariffs did impact the function of the economy, even in the 19th century. By doing this, is Biden being stupid?
In general, I'm a protectionist. I believe in protecting American jobs and domestic industries from foreign depredation. The American steel industry absolutely should have been protected with tariffs against imported Japanese steel during the 1980s, when the Japanese dumped the steel below the market price, below the price that they needed to break even, just in order to drive the American industry out of business. Go to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, you'll see what it looks like afterwards. And they wanted to, and it succeeded, right? They didn't do that. This was under Ronald Reagan, and he was not a protectionist. He was a free trader. And so as a result, I might argue a free traitor to American jobs.
I see what you did there.
Yes. But it was, it was bad. There's a place and a time. This is a typical example of classic Biden of closing the barn door after all the horses have run away many, many decades ago. The steel industry wasn't just gutted financially in the 80s. It never came back. It rotted away. And in fact, right now, pending before the Biden administration as for possible antitrust action is this pending merger acquisition by Nippon Steel, which is of course a Japanese company, of US Steel, the biggest steel company in the country. So in other words, the American steel market is finished. So effectively, here's the grand irony. Joe Biden's going to protect the Japanese steel industry again here in the US against the Chinese. That's what he's doing. Really. I mean, it's so fucking stupid. I mean, if it was 1981, I'd be all about it. But it's like you know, who cares at this point? You're not, I mean, yes, I guess you're protecting some American jobs, but you know, the steel jobs that are left here are few and far between compared to the way
Yeah.
it used to be. And the wages are nothing the way that they were, where back in the 70s and 80s, when steel workers could send their kids to college, on the money that they earned. So I think it's dumb because of the timing. What do you think?
Well, I think you're right. I think that you and I differ on protectionism. I am a free market guy, but in this instance, it's just like, it's so late. I mean, okay, let me just back up a second here and say I live in Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham was the Pittsburgh of the South. That's what was designed for that. It was, that's what created it in 1871. The big mules from up in Pittsburgh said, well, we can have cheap. If you read the ads, they will make your jaw drop. You can have cheap white labor. They had to make that distinction.
White labor is the best labor.
And they didn't have unions, so they could come down here. And the Ring of Fire, you could go up to Red Mountain, which overlooks the city, and you could have the Ring of Fire. You could see all across from point to point. You had steel mills, and you could see the flames from the forges burning away. Well, those all went away. There is one steel plant left in the Birmingham area. It's pretty small by comparison. I have gone up through the Rust Belt in the last few years, and you can see much bigger plants, much bigger catastrophes by not protecting American markets. Why do it now? What's the point here, Ted? I mean, seriously.
You got me. I don't
All
get
right.
it, Scott, at all. I mean, I think it's like, it's kind of like the Iranian drone attack, purely performative. I mean, look, right now it is an election year. The president's trying to shore up his support with big labor. It's a little bit weak. Maybe he's like, look at me, I'm standing up for the workers. It may be more meaningfully a way to tell the Chinese, stop fucking with us. We have this rivalry with you. We're going to lean on you. It's a bad move. And it's, I don't think there's anything to be gained by pissing off the Chinese. They're not looking to hurt us. They're just looking to rake in money. And this is like, frankly, at this stage, if we can get cheap Chinese imports for steel, and it's not really competing against an American industry, because that American industry is gone and is never coming back, why not take it? So in this particular sector, I'm a free trader, because I just don't see the reason. There's no jobs to protect,
Well, it dovetails into a conversation real quick about the Biden administration and the billions of dollars they're throwing to try to resuscitate the American Intel chip, or not just Intel is not just one of the companies, but the chip industry in this United States, all of which has been shipped out to China, to India, to Vietnam, and other places. Again, I feel very uneasy trying to force feed an economy and trying to resuscitate an economy. As you mentioned, steel's not coming back. You're not going to all of a sudden Akron, Ohio steel mills.
Sorry to interrupt, Scott, but it's like, remember during the last campaign, Trump kept talking about, I'm going to bring back coal. In 2016, he said that. And it's like in West Virginia. It's like, but no, there's no demand for it. No one wants coal. I mean, so it's like the coal industry, wasn't shivved or anything. It's just that the marketplace moved to other cleaner energy sources, and and less clean, like fracking. It's just, that's how it went. It's just a change in the business. It's the same sort of thing. I think, we're in complete agreement here. I think, look, Joe Biden the thing is, like, I'm sympathetic to Joe Biden's argument here, which is he's really between a rock and a hard place. Inflation. He has to, he can't depress prices or we'll go into a depression. So, all he can do is lower inflation, but it's literally impossible to go back in time and reduce the very high inflation that followed the restart of the economy after the COVID lockdown. And that was inevitable that that was going to happen. I mean, it was a very analogous situation to the end of World War I, which coincided with the lockdown of the Spanish flu pandemic. So you had a double kind of whammy, right? And consumer spending had been radically depressed from 1917 to 1921. And then the economy was a disaster. So when people started spending again, at that time, President Warren Harding, who I think you kind of admire, he was smart.
Yeah, Coolidge.
He was like, we're not going to stimulate the economy.
Yeah.
Yes. We don't
Yes.
think we need to. We think it'll all just come back by itself. And it did. It came back gangbusters. And in fact, there was a huge danger that the economy was going to overheat. And inflation did get really out of control. Both Harding and Coolidge decided, again, we're not going to do anything. We don't need to cut. We don't need to raise interest rates. The pent up demand will exhaust itself, and things will even out. And they did until the stock market crashed. So it was like this time, Biden was very worried about the economy, so he overstimulated it. When he came in with the Inflation Reduction Act, and ironically. And so the inflation went way up high, but now that's done, and there's nothing he can't undo it. We can't go back to 2020 prices, but the American people remember 2020 prices, and they want those prices back. So all you can really kind of do at this point, people will get used to the new prices, but it's going to take time. Will it happen by November? Maybe, maybe not. But I think where Biden could maybe do something would be with housing prices. I mean, the housing market's completely frozen because of high interest rates. There's no inventory. There's a major part, the homeless problem is in large part caused due to a lack of affordable housing. My idea, he won't do it, but my big idea is seize some of the 30 million abandoned homes in the United States that have been, I'm being abandoned, I mean, unoccupied for 20 years or more, boarded up, pieces of shit, no one's ever going to live there. Seize them, turn that into affordable housing and housing for the formerly homeless. Like, you will increase housing stock dramatically. That's going to make housing affordable. Give those houses away for a song. Just make it a WPA project. Basically, have people pay only the cost that a new federal, like maybe the FHA establishes a construction agency. Like if it costs $12,000 to build that house, you give it to people for $12,000. I guarantee you're going to be putting people in their starter homes. You're going to be revitalizing neighborhoods. It's going to, the houses that are around those houses, their values will go up. Local tax collections will go up. It's going to revitalize the inner cities all over the country. This is the key.
Interesting. No, I've thought about that a lot. You mentioned that the other day when I was out there. You also mentioned on the podcast the people's perception of inflation, the lag time. That inflation is at 3%. It's not as horrible as it was coming out of the pandemic, but people don't see that. They see, like me, they go like, I can't go out to lunch now for less than $50 with my wife.
Yeah. And that's the new reality. So at this point, success for Biden is like, if it's only $52 for you to go out to lunch with your wife by November, that's success. So that's
but people see it, and I think you make that valid point. There's this lag time. It was a lag time for George H.W. Bush in 1992. Yep. The economy was coming back after a shallow recession.
Was in 94. He would have won.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you, Ted Rall, and thanks again for last week for the hospitality. Where can we see all things Ted Rallian?
Please check out my daily show on Sputnik, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. to 12 noon Eastern, the final countdown.
An excellent show, by the way.
Angie Wong, and frequently with you, Scott Stantis. Also, you watch it on X Spaces or Rumble or on Sputnik News. Go to whowhatwhy.org on Saturdays. Look at my cartoons. Go to rawl.com. Go to gocomics.com/Ted Rall. And go to Censor Clip for both you, Scott, and me to look at our mini podcast. Scott, where can we find all things Scott Stantis?
You can go to gocomics.com/Scott Stantis for my editorial cartoons, gocomics.com/Prickly City. Allegedly, the Chicago Tribune they just switched over to a new, web page type thingy and lost my gallery. I'm not kidding. They can't find it anywhere.
Same
Interestingly,
people who the same government agency who rebuilt the FAFSA, obviously,
exactly.
and gave you the Obamacare website.
They found other galleries, interestingly enough. They just couldn't find mine, but hopefully we'll get that up and running shortly. And like Ted said, Center Clip, which I really love, and I do economics discussions, which I adore, and we can talk politics. It's a real time, 30 seconds to no longer than 5 minutes. It's an awesome platform, so I'm really happy. And Ted, again, one last time, thank you so much for the hospitality. I just had a great time. Got to meet Clovis face to face.
True.
And I fear him now. And I worship
you
him.
Understand, like he is in charge of everything. Yeah.
He is.
Okay. All right.
God bless him.
With that, everyone, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. See you every week or more often if news breaks. See ya.
Bye.